Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air. As always, we begin in the name of Allah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you all so much for joining us. I believe this is our first CAIR on Air of the calendar year, so very exciting time. Hope all of you are doing well and staying safe. Today, we want to discuss the issue of anti-Muslim bigotry, also known as Islamophobia. This has been a hot topic in the media in recent weeks because of incidents as far away as Sweden and Minnesota. And so we want to dive into that issue. What is Islamophobia? What is the state of anti-Muslim bigotry in Europe right now? What's going on in Sweden with this Quran burning that is now triggering copycat incidents in other countries? And how should we as a Muslim community, Muslim individuals, Muslim leaders, Muslim organizations respond to these hateful provocations? To discuss all this, we have our special guest, the best person to discuss this with, Dr. Hatem Bazian of UC Berkeley and the director of their Center on Islamophobia. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Bazian.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us. We know you're a busy man. You got a flight to catch soon, inshallah, so we're very happy you made time for us. Jazakallah khair. So first, Dr. Bazian, there's been a lot of debate in recent weeks of discussion. What is Islamophobia, right? Because it could mean different things to different people. It's somewhat a matter of opinion. You know, you're an expert on this. You have an entire center at Berkeley dedicated to the study of Islamophobia. How do you define Islamophobia? How do you identify what is and is not Islamophobia?
The shorthand, Islamophobia is a type of racism that targets Muslimness or perception of Muslimness with a whole host of regulations. This would include discrimination, exclusion from jobs and promotions. It includes acts of violence. It includes a form of racism targeting houses of worship, mosques, and so on. So it's a type of racism. It is not, as often some of those who are distractors say, it is not allowing us to debate Islam and ideas about religion. And I think in here, the recent case in Hamlin College is a case in point. We say that it is not a Islamophobia to have in an art class images that were drawn of the Prophet Muhammad by Muslims that were deployed as part of the art class.
And so, Dr. Baz, you make an important point, right? That we've seen anti-Muslim bigotry manifest in different ways, including people using depictions of the Prophet, may peace and blessing be upon him, to cause offense, to insult Muslims. And I think what you're noting is that the depiction shown in an art class in Hamlin obviously is not the same thing as anti-Muslim extremists who depict or draw or show images to cause offense. So that brings us to what happened in Sweden. So there's recently a Quran burning in Sweden by a far-right politician there. How do you assess that? Can we characterize that as Islamophobia? Why not? And just tell us about this situation, what's going on in Sweden?
Well, any attempt to use symbols of Islam and symbols that are dear to Muslims, whether it's the Quran in this case, images of the Prophet in relations to the Dutch and the Netherlands in the cartoon, this constitutes Islamophobia because the core aspect of what is taking place is an attempt to taunt the Muslim community by engaging in the burning of the Quran. So it is not a form of freedom of expression, because many of those who argue about the burning of the Quran, that it is a cherished value in Western society. And I would argue it's also in Muslim society to have freedom of expression. The question is, what is the expression that is being defended in relation to the burning of the Quran? So I actually classify this as taunting, a form of civil society taunting of the Muslim community as a minority, by trying to say that you don't belong in this country unless you accept to be insulted in public and your sacred symbols being violated. And in this sense also, individuals that are engaging in burning the Quran and defaming sacred elements of the Islamic tradition are trying also to use the history of Christianity as it relates to the tension around the role of the church to make it the universal norm of what is to be accepted and what is not in being sacrilegious in the discourse. So I think those are the core issues when we're dealing with Sweden.
Gotcha. So then let me ask you this. The Swedish government's response to this has been to say, well, look, we value free speech, and just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's a nice thing to do. It seemed like they were very hesitant to directly, explicitly condemn what happened, but they have come around closer to doing that in some of their statements, public statements. What's your assessment of the Swedish government's role in this? Does their argument carry water? What do you think about the Swedish government's role in this?
Well, this is a phenomena that we're seeing across Europe. It's not only unique to Sweden, but across Europe. When it comes to Muslims, it becomes that the governments, whether it's Sweden, France, England, so on, they become almost hyper active in defending freedom of expression when it's exactly racist and taunting of the Muslim community. While other elements of the society, again, they are not absolutists in defending freedom of expression. Case in point, if you have Nazi symbols and you go out publicly, you might be subject to arrest. And in some countries, you're subject to actually being imprisoned. And I would argue it rightly so, because we have saw and witnessed what Nazi symbolism and action have resulted. So in here, they're not absolutists, but when it comes to Muslims, they become absolutists, and this as a result of a whole phenomena of Islamophobic discourse, where politics in Europe has been defined or sits at the crossroads of Muslim inclusion and exclusion. And as such, we need to actually say that the Swedish response and the government response by tying their camel to the freedom of expression in this case falls short of defending the rights of minorities, in here the minority Muslim. And I also need to say that within the Swedish political discourses, the Muslims have been the primary targets of anti-immigrant sentiments. Both right, left, and center engage in these discourses. So the burning of the Quran was seen, if you actually come strongly against it from the government, you are accused that in essence you are defending and being a lover of Muslims who are undermining our Western civilization. So that's the discourse that is being in there. And I think the Swedish government is giving the oxygen by being very soft in critiquing as well as setting up the boundaries of what is acceptable discourse in the public, even though if it is a right-wing, extreme right-wing individuals, that the response from the Swedish government falls short of actually setting the boundaries of what is acceptable and what's not.
And that's what's puzzling and I think frustrating people is that, you could almost understand if European nations were consistent and just allowing free speech broadly. But as you noted, there are all sorts of things that various European countries will prosecute if you just say them. Holocaust denial is subject to prosecution, I would say rightfully so. But and various things you noted, wearing certain symbols in public, there are various things you could do in public that are technically free speech, but are banned and illegal and potentially subject to prosecution, and yet Muslims don't seem to get the benefit of those limits on public speech. And so I think that's what's frustrating many Muslims, is that it seems to not really be a belief in free speech, but a belief in free speech for some people and not free speech for all people. Free speech when it means protecting some victims, but not all victims of this sort of bigoted taunting, as you call it. So that being said, Dr. Bazian, how should the Muslim community respond in Sweden, organizationally, leadership-wise? Do we just, turn the other cheek and ignore this? Do we, try to build more bridges? Do we condemn it? What's the best appropriate response when someone is deliberately trying to probably spark a very negative reaction? What's the proper response?
One is that we need to specifically label it as is. We should reject the notion that this is freedom of expression. This is taunting and bullying of Muslim society. That's one. Second, I do think that Muslims need to develop their institutional capacity. This is not a singular response. And both CAIR and other organizations are very important for us to develop this institutional response. Third, we should insist on, whether in Sweden or France, UK, or the United States, that civil society leadership should be arrayed publicly to actually condemn it unequivocally and consistently and replicate that condemnation, because if they are wishy-washy, they're giving the oxygen for these Islamophobes to continue in this pattern. Fourthly, and I do discourage people from engaging in mass protests in this case, because that's exactly what this right-wing extreme person wants, because they want the attention. So I often encourage people in responding to Islamophobia, please don't tweet and amplify Islamophobic negative content, amplify the sound responses, amplify the messages that actually challenge this, so you would be actually driving the narrative rather than constantly being in a reactive mode to the narrative. So these are some of the elements. And lastly, I would actually insist on the Swedish government, the European Union, and other places, they actually should create legal codes that criminalizes Islamophobic conduct. And I think that's what we should be insisting. And I know that the United Nations, we have March 15th as the International Day of Recognition of the Crime of Islamophobia. But I think what we move is from symbolic recognition of Islamophobia to effective governance and structures to criminalize those who engage in Islamophobia, like any other elements of racism and racist discourses.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people hate is just consistency, right? And whatever your country is doing, if you're a free speech absolutist, then okay, good luck with that. If you have free speech with some reasonable limits, okay, but those reasonable limits should be applied to everyone, and everyone should get the benefit of those reasonable limits, not just some community. So, last question, Dr. Bazian, is how would you assess the state of anti-Muslim bigotry in Europe right now? Obviously, we've seen in France Muslim organizations be shut down. We've seen in Austria attempt to do the same, but we've also seen, again, ups and downs. The Austrian Prime Minister, Mr. Kurz, was openly anti-Muslim. He's out of power. France didn't elect Marine Le Pen, who was, really openly anti-Muslim, but Emmanuel Macron is still pretty Islamophobic, many people would say. How do you assess anti-Muslim bigotry in general in Europe right now?
I think we need to first at least understand that Islamophobia is the vehicle, the bridge politicians are using in order to get seats of power. And as such, whether it's from the right or left, now remember, Macron in France is counted to be center-left, but yet his policies, in essence, are mirror image, if anything, have a much more sugar coating of Islamophobic discourse. So across Europe, with minor exception, the political vehicle for getting into seats of power and claiming that you are defending the society is using the Muslim subject, racializing the Muslim subject, constructing fear of the Muslim subject as a way to do so, which allows these politicians not to deal with the issues at hand: economic disparity, lack of jobs, increasing the retirement age, the dissolution of pension funds. So in this sense, I say that across Europe, if your car breaks down, the mechanic will tell you there is a Muslim in the engine, rather than the car company actually have completely messed up the controls of the car and cheated you. So in essence, the Muslim becomes the boogeyman woman across the spectrum. And we see that intensifying in France, in the UK, in Austria, in the Belgium, Sweden, Netherlands, and so on. And that's the phenomena that we're dealing with. And we still have not yet entered into the European society as a whole, recognizing that they have a problem. I say that they do need to go to a 12-step program, but the first step have not yet been gotten or taken by European countries, despite the conversation in the European Council or the European Parliament in Brussels. Even the human rights, and the human rights dimension, the European Court actually said that the French restrictions on the hijab in employment and in public space does not constitute a human rights violation. So that's where we are in Europe. And I think we are still dealing with a serious intensification of Islamophobia and the target of Muslim subjects, because the political landscape have accepted this to be the bridge into power and seats of influence.
Yeah, no doubt. And we've seen that happen around the world. In the United States, we all know that there's certain communities that are used as boogeymen to win votes for certain politicians. So it's a tried and true strategy, but it doesn't work forever. And we certainly hope it will stop working in Europe at some point, God willing. But they're dealing with a lot of deep-seated racism and centuries of anti-Muslim bigotry. You don't get over that overnight. And so we certainly hope that we express our solidarity with the Muslim community in Sweden and around the world. We have to be united to stand up for what is right, not just to complain and to be victims. No, we're not victims. We have to unite to stand up for what is right, and that is the best way to respond to people who seek to extinguish the light of Allah, which they will never be able to do. Dr. Bazian, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah grant you safe travels. We look forward to talking to you soon, inshallah.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And thank you all for watching today's episode of CAIR on Air. We hope to see you again soon, inshallah. Check out our Facebook page and Twitter page and Instagram for updates about things that you can help us do. Right now, we're trying to fight an attempt to pull Congresswoman Ilhan Omar off the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We just need a few reasonable Republicans to vote against that to stop it from happening. You can fill out that form and ask a member of Congress to vote against that push by Kevin McCarthy. And there are numerous other things you can do to support the work of CAIR. Just check out our website, cair.com, or go to one of our social media pages. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah guide us all and protect us all. And may peace and blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad, his family, his companions, and all of God's prophets and messengers. Assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.